Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Academic Data Science Alliance special interest group meeting. This is sort of a combo DEI education SIG setup. We're here with Carrie Diaz Eaton and Sam Donovan, who are going to talk to us today about QUBES and other things. I have a couple of announcements to make. First, the code of conduct that we have for the Academic Data Science Alliance, which I'm placing in the chat right now, applies to our events online as well as in person. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, please do. And if you find yourself in a situation where you'd like to report a code of conduct issue, you can find out how to do that at the link that I just dropped in there. I also want to point out that our annual meetings are coming up in the fall in person in Savannah, Georgia. And if you'd like to learn more about those meetings, and especially if you'd like to submit a proposal to the ADSA annual meeting to give a talk, we would love to see your proposal come in. So take a look at that link and see what you think. Again, welcome. I'm going to hand things over to Sam and Carrie here, and they're going to get us started. So Sam and Carrie, take it away with some introductions and then run your talks.
Good afternoon. My understanding is that I'm going to introduce myself briefly. Carrie will introduce herself briefly, and then I'll give a 10-ish, 15-minute-ish presentation, and Carrie will do the same, and we'll have lots of time for discussion afterwards. So I'm Sam Donovan. I'm an instructor at the University of Pittsburgh in the Department of Biological Sciences. I'm also active in the BioQuest Curriculum Consortium, an educational nonprofit that's been around for 35 years now, and the QUBES project, which I'll be talking about today. Carrie?
Yeah, sure. I'm Carrie Diaz Eaton. I'm Associate Professor of Digital and Computational Studies at Bates College in Maine. As you can see behind me, no virtual background today. I'm going to talk a little, I am also part of the QUBES project, but I'm going to talk also a little bit about a collaborative effort that QUBES helped co-found called the SCORE Network. So you'll hear about that after Sam. Thanks.
Sam, you're still muted, but maybe you're looking for the...
Nope, sorry, I was just chattering away. Hopefully you're seeing my slide full screen. Is that correct? Okay, excellent. Well, thanks for this opportunity. I love your newsletter. I read the ADSA newsletter all the time. So I'm going to be sharing some information about this project called QUBES, which with respect to how we're using it to help support faculty who are trying to adopt data science principles and practices within their courses. And so I need to acknowledge that we have significant funding from the National Science Foundation and also funding from the Hewlett Foundation with regards to open education resources support. So, oops, come on down. So in brief, what I'll be discussing today, I was just going to do a little orientation to our community, because our community is broader than just the data science folks. And then lay out a little bit of the challenges that we face and what we're trying to accomplish. And then share some background on the infrastructure we provide. So we have a platform that has both social and technical components that's designed to facilitate scholarship around teaching and learning. And then I'll share some information and examples of partnerships with data science education initiatives. And then I will hand it off to Carrie, who will address some strategies around foregrounding anti-racism, equity, social justice, and inclusion components. And I should have mentioned up front on the title slide, I'm making this presentation, but this work involved many, many people who are still actively involved. And so I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll be answering for many people. Lots of contributions to this project. So the QUBES project, which is Quantitative Undergraduate Biology Education and Synthesis, is really focused at the undergraduate level, centered in biology, but we are interdisciplinary, not just in the chemistry, physics kind of interdisciplinary, but special emphasis on mathematics, statistics, and computational tools. And we've approached this because we really feel like this is the center of where biology research is going. And if biology education needs to reflect the ways that we understand biological knowledge, right? The epistemology we use, the methodologies we use, then we need to begin to integrate these resources. We primarily work with faculty across diverse institution types. We're very proud of our community college participation, but we also have a variety of other stakeholders, including professional societies, nonprofits, and things like data providers. And I'm doing a Science Gateways Community Institute focus week on sort of making business models and things. So I picked up this language recently. We have a two-sided marketing strategy. So we are both presenting ourselves as a resource for projects. So someone's gotten some National Science Foundation or other funding, and they're trying to sort of spin up their site very quickly, and it's going to be a community-oriented project. Well, we can provide some services and infrastructure to help them do that. At the same time, we're serving undergraduate faculty in STEM broadly who are looking for resources and opportunities to use some tools. And so we sort of market to both of those communities. So we are all about collaboration. We're all about bottom up, right? We feel like faculty are a particularly important leverage point for education reform because they're an amplifier. They get into the classrooms, they do the work. And we have the BioQuest Curriculum Consortium has been sort of characterized as a community of transformation, which really means, there's a book there that made that assertion. It really means that it's around for a long time so that it can support faculty through the professional process. You can't just drop in and drop out. That it's deeply philosophically oriented. There is a commitment to a certain set of things that are shared in that community. And in fact, that it is community-centric, that it is an attempt to bring everyone along and move the culture of the discipline. So those are all things we're very committed to and proud of. So the challenges that we face are not our challenges alone. This is sort of the dystopian view. If you know William Gibson, the science fiction writer, he has this fairly famous quote, "The future is here, it's just not very evenly distributed." And I think that in terms of computational, quantitative, data science, education, and skills, this could not be more true, right? We are at this inflection point where we're either going to integrate these ideas into undergraduate curricula broadly, and we're particularly interested in biology curricula, or we're going to continue to divide who has these skills and who has access to the jobs associated with those skills and so forth. So the science is moving fast, the classroom is not moving fast, and the faculty are the challenge, just because many of teaching faculty did not grow up with research experience in data-intensive science. And so it's challenging for them to pick those things up and teach with them. Another general challenge that we face, that I'm sure many other people face as well, has been characterized as the last mile problem. The idea here is that there are certain patterns of distribution of information and resources. And so this comes out of logistics and communications, and the sort of bulk transport of materials that gets you wide distribution on a global or national scale may not be the same mechanism you need to use on a local scale. So there are lots and lots of internet-based resources to support teaching and learning, but how do you get those into classrooms? How do you connect with faculty? How do you support faculty through that process? And so additionally, bringing together all those things, the high quality teaching resources, the tools to use those resources, and the community to support the use of those resources is how we're addressing that. Now, more positively, there are a lot of opportunities. So if you're familiar with Alan Kay, innovative computer scientist, particularly in education, one of his better known quotes is, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it." And the lever here is really open science, right? We have this change in the ethos and the practices that scientists are using that make it normal to share your process, share your data, share your code. And we've picked up on that both in terms of utilizing those resources that scientists share and in terms of building the ethos for open education practices. So we're able to, the scientists we work with, the teachers, are now getting exposed to open science philosophies in general, and we can leverage that to continue that communication. So what does all this mean? What this means is that we were funded to develop an infrastructure to support scholarship of teaching and learning. And so here's a snapshot of the home page, but you can see that in general, we're talking about resources, community, and services. And it's a big, complicated space. And it's big and complicated in large part because we are providing several different kinds of services, and we're fostering a whole bunch of different kinds of groups. So we work with faculty to connect them to communities of practice where they can engage in their professional activities. And it's, again, sometimes it's from faculty off the street who are looking for resources and get drawn in. And sometimes it's a project that asks us to host their resources. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to describe 4 major sort of functionalities that we are trying to lever to support and accelerate education reform. We provide membership-controlled group spaces, right? We're built on HubZero platform. It's a big content management system, and we can allow groups to go in there and generate a new group, establish who can belong to that group, expose to the public whatever parts of that group they'd like to, or keep it hidden if they're doing work that they feel they're not ready to share yet. Those group spaces are full of communications and productivity tools, discussion boards, wikis, blogs, all sorts of ways to share collections of resources. And so those groups get lots of autonomy. They can customize their look and feel. They can set up their page structure however they'd like. And the idea is that we want that to be a working space, right? We want that to be something that they can use to get their work done. So a group will become established, and then we have these professional development models called faculty mentoring networks. And these are sort of semester-long collections of faculty with various expertise brought together with generally a topic area expertise or somebody who's authored some materials. And we have what we call a long duration, low intensity professional development experience with the goal of faculty learning how to use the educational resource, customizing it for use in their own course context, implementing it in their course, and then republishing their version of it at the end. And so it sort of takes a faculty member through a complete scholarship cycle, but in a supportive environment where they can introduce their RNA-seq activity, and then when it falls apart, they can come back and debrief with the community of other people who are trying to do the exact same thing. So the third major component of our tool set is an open publishing platform, which allows people to use Creative Commons licenses to share their materials. And we have a variety of things like digital object identifiers, full Git-like version control so that people can fork other people's materials. We don't use fork because many of our participants don't know that language. So we talk about adaptations. But the idea is, in a complete open education resources lifecycle, it's a feedback loop, right? Materials are being modified, used, and then reshared. So you've customized something for a particular educational setting, a 3-hour lab instead of a 6-hour lab, or a particular student audience. And we link all these things together to make them work. You can also use QUBES to port through to some cloud computing resources, and we provide a variety of tools. This is not a complete list. People can publish their Shiny apps up here so that you can publish a teaching material, point to the Shiny app, and your students can use it without having to download that software or having to run it on a commercial server or anything like that. So we have a variety of projects that are sort of resident on the QUBES platform that tie to big data, data science, bioinformatics. Here's a bioinformatics and life sciences education. That's an RCN, Research Coordination Network, undergraduate biology education. Genomics Education Alliance, actually a consortium of genomics projects. This is, I'll say this, but hopefully the recording won't be available until it's official. The BEAD network has gone through an incubator phase and is now going to receive a full RCN. So this is biological and environmental data science education. There's another genomics project. I just grabbed a few. Genomics Education Partnership is all about annotation, shared data. These support cures mostly. Digging into data was a project that really focused on ecological data, using pre-published data and doing novel analyses with them. We partner with big data providers like Neon and run these faculty mentoring networks. Swirl is a strategy for learning to use R by having the instruction embedded in the R Studio environment. We've run workshops that focused on introducing data science to faculty. Here's another R platform for learning your way around as a beginning biologist. The EDSIN project, Environmental Data Science Inclusion Network, was hosted on QUBES. Biodiversity, this is just one representative of groups that are pulling data from museum collections. And these are really great opportunities for students to work with rich metadata and ask biological questions. I'm not even sure what's popping up. Okay, then high throughput case studies, the HITS project. So these are all independently funded projects that are hosted on the QUBES platform, take advantage of those 4 components of the infrastructure that I talked about, and are publishing their materials into this common repository. And so you have to keep in mind here that we're biology centric. And so most of these projects are not data science per se. They are helping introduce data science principles and practices into an introductory biology or a beginning biology context. I just want to give one little example of how we are able to address our faculty audience, sort of understanding the ebb and flow of what these teachers are doing. So this is this year's summer workshop. And so we went virtual like everyone else last summer. We're virtual again this year. And what we've done is created what we call a fall kickoff meeting, where we have a couple of light weeks. Weeks 1 and 3 are fairly light. And then we run a bunch of workshops in the middle week. But all of that is designed to just be a setup so that we create working groups. And then faculty spend the fall semester working on projects that emerged out of this meeting, publishing those projects and disseminating them. And so we draw groups in who are trying to get feedback on their work or trying to disseminate their work, and they generate the activities that we then facilitate over the fall semester. I just have to put in a nod to another workshop that we are helping to organize. I'm on the coordinating committee, but Natasha Garnis is the lead. It comes out of the Edison project and is co-sponsored by that, and Code for Science and Society. And here's just, a few statistics. We've been around for about 7 years now. We've been functional for almost 5. And I stole this from one of Carrie's reports, but we have lots and lots of substantial partners and collaborations. And I'll just point out one thing here. I think this was 2020 data. We wrote letters for 27 proposals that year. So we are incredibly focused on facilitating community work and amplifying education scholarship and education reform. And we think we're a good community because there's a lot of action around data intensive science and data science principles and practices. So I think, are we going to go straight to Carrie? Or
yeah, let's go over to Carrie and then we'll do questions
Great.
at the end.
Let me stop sharing. There we go.
Awesome. I had a hardware switch, so hopefully this works well. How's it going, Steve or Sam? Can you see the full screen?
Yep, we can see your slide.
Okay, awesome. So Sam talked a lot about what we've done over the last 7-8 years almost with the QUBES project, and it's been exciting to collaborate with BioQuest on that. We've worked with a lot of partners over the years, and through doing all of that work, we've found out a lot about what our partners' strengths are, but also what our partners' concerns are. And also, as Sam said, looking towards the future, what are the big issues? When we started very early, folks were definitely thinking about adopting R. Were they using the language of data science? Maybe not. Certainly we were thinking about it was, hot off the heels off the release of a few national reports like the Vision and Change report that said you have to do modeling as part of your biology degree. And so that was yet sort of another thing that our community was facing. We were like, okay, how do we help you? Let's think about what those best practices are. So as a natural evolution of this, and lately, we had partners that we had been working with now for a number of years, that were at the end of their grants, their 5-year grants, that, you know, we're saying, okay, like this has impact. I want this to have a life. How do I maintain sustainability? Are you going to kick me off your platform if I can't make the payment? I mean, like, and we started, you know, we've been coaching and working with a lot of these individuals, as well as thinking about our own sustainability. And so we had this really nice, rich discussion space, because what was starting to happen was the dialogue was very much about, you know, who do we charge? Who do we, you know, to access? And we realized that, you know, why does this conversation make us feel so uncomfortable? Because we have this commitment to redistribution or of sort of the future, as Sam pointed out from the quote earlier. And so how do we maintain our commitment to the open ecosystem, to social justice, if you know, because we want, you know, financial sustainability, and sorting through that tension was a difficult process, but we fortunate enough to get some additional NSF funding in the form of a research coordination network to start a network specifically to have these discussions. And so I lead the SCORE network, which is what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. SCORE lives on QUBES. It uses the cyber infrastructure of QUBES. It uses a lot of the practices and that QUBES uses in terms of virtual professional development. It uses a lot of the frameworks in terms of why we think transformational change happens throughout the community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about all of those things, but in this broader context of not just QUBES, but beyond QUBES. What does this mean for STEM education? So SCORE Network stands for Sustainability Challenges for Open Resources to Promote an Equitable Undergraduate Biology Education. So I'm just going to call it SCORE. Technically, we started really as, again, centered in undergraduate biology education, and with some more recent funding from the Hewlett Foundation have expanded more broadly into STEM education. So we're really sort of supporting a broad set of STEM education projects. And so our sort of broad philosophy here is, you know, we're committed to social justice and open education through broad partnerships, innovation, research, and collaboration. We provide support to help create an accessible, open, inclusive OER ecosystem with a focus on community and advocacy for social justice and equity in STEM education. And I'm gonna break that down into a few different slides going forward, but I just sort of wanted to say broadly, we're about bringing people together to have tough conversations, and at the project leader, institutional leader level, and then giving them tools to think about how their organizations are dealing with the challenges that confront them. And one of the nice things about working on that level is that we can work across many different sectors. So we're coming, some of what has informed the QUBES approach in OER has come very much from a disciplinary-based perspective and wanting to share information and thinking about digital libraries as a form for doing that and reinventing that into a more lively ecosystem. But there's also a wealth and abundance of knowledge about OER within the library sectors, and really good, interesting understanding about what open science and open education mean coming from the library sectors that we're maybe less connected to as a STEM faculty member, right? And so how do we share or bridge knowledge between those sectors? Oftentimes, another characterization of sort of being in very different buildings, oftentimes on campus, another characterization of this separation is our funding mechanisms that folks in these discipline-based areas might be looking towards federal agencies like NSF. Folks doing OER in libraries often have tapping into state level, regional level compact funding or private foundation funding. And so again, what are the bridges that we can make between these worlds to understand the cultures and collaborate and benefit from each other's networks? There's sort of three pieces of the SCORE puzzle here, open education being one of them, science being another, that grounding and you know, I almost feel like, you know, those memes of the Venn diagram, and each of these are filled in with something different. But I mean, there is an overlap between open education and science, and open science might even live somewhere in here where we're thinking about open science as being sort of a science practice, but it can also be part of an open education practice. We're thinking about sustainability a lot, like how is sustainability maybe different for folks that are in the STEM disciplines or similar, and what does that mean in the context of education and OER? And so we're thinking about all these three things at the same time, but we're inviting people to the conversation that have expertise either solidly in one area or more than one area, but not necessarily all three. We're just like at one point we talked about sort of the data science unicorn. I don't know that that's a problem anymore, but it used to be like somebody who has all the skills from getting data and cleaning it to, you know, doing the computational models, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, we're not expecting anybody to come to this table with all of the knowledge of all these three areas, but really the willingness or the interest to think about how these intersect. And at the underpinning of it all is racial equity and social justice, where because when we had one of our very first early meetings, it became pretty clear that we didn't have a lot of answers for sustainability, but we had some models to draw from, but we didn't even have that for racial equity and social justice. So the conversation was a little more stilted way back in 2019 when we had our first meeting. We realized we needed to step up and help folks really think through what that means for their organization if we really wanted to keep true to our values about open or what we think open means. I'm gonna play on Sam's earlier slide where he talked about sort of open science, and I want to talk more broadly about the open ecosystem. And this is something put together by my colleague Karen Cagnoliosi, which tries to establish open educational practices alongside some of the things that we attribute to open science. So, you know, thinking about the accessibility of OER, but also the ability to contribute freely to this corpus of educational resources, to use these as part of your classroom practice so that the participants in the classroom environments are also participants in the knowledge creation. Open access publishing is also a piece of when we think about the cyber infrastructure, and we think about, you know, is this freely available? I mean, there's an interface there. Sam talked about open source software in terms of even our ability to provide cloud computing on QUBES. We think about the propagation of open science practices and what having OER and open pedagogy and open source software allow us to do in the classroom when it comes to modeling open science practices, and even working with open data, contributing to, working for. So these we see as a broader open ecosystem that isn't just about open science, but also open education. And so hopefully maybe you're a little bought in as well too. And then in terms of some of the frameworks we use to think about justice, a vast majority of attention has been paid in open education to redistributive justice, the fact that open educational materials are free. But as Lambert pointed out in a 2018 paper, there is more than just redistributive justice. It takes more than just that sort of justice. She talks about recognitive justice and representational justice. Recognitive justice is, what is the diversity in that curriculum? Are you including images? More than images, do you have people in your case studies? Do your people have names in those case studies? Are those names inherently stereotypical of a particular cultural that they might be drawn on? And do they have any stereotypes embedded of those people? Whose knowledge is presented? Is it of a particular way of knowing? And so this, like, when we're doing open OER, how is that shaping? We have the opportunity to shape it as better because it's open, we can all contribute to it, but what does it look like now where could we really go with this? Could we pay attention to this as a key important part of the educational experience that we can help mold because of its flexibility? Representational justice takes that one step further. Instead of just case studies about or something like that, we're actually saying, let's have resources that allow people to tell their own stories. So, you know, not going through the filter of others or the imagination of others that then overlays stereotypes of their own. And so a way to do this, for example, is to have co-construction of OER text by a wide variety of learners and authors that are part of marginalized groups. And so I think, like, even if you're not at the level yet where you're thinking about co-construction, you know, by learners through a course experience, which would be sort of open pedagogy, I hope you're thinking about how the educational experiences that you're presenting, who's telling those, who are the models, those whose stories are represented, and how are they represented, and by whom, and is that a key piece of your thinking? Sam mentioned before that there's a basis of literature, community of transformations, and BioQuest was one of the case studies in a famous Kezar paper about communities of transformation.
Carrie, I think we lost sound from you.
This is something that we've really learned a lot from our work with QUBES. So we had, you know, folks were even scared to display their not knowing of computational skills or quantitative things, and felt some shame about that. And we learned a lot about that. We learned that sometimes you do need to have some private conversations that really get folks to dig deep, but you have a lot of peer support that accompanies that. And we were all doing that in the virtual environment with QUBES. And so we take a lot of those practices and we think about, how do we facilitate these conversations among project leaders, institutional leaders, instructional designers, to like say, like, let's talk about our resources and how good they are and what our organization could be doing better from that perspective. And I think it really, really helps. Lastly, not quite lastly, but one of the other things I just want to say is that I mentioned this SCORE has taken 2 points of evolution. One is that it has expanded more broadly from sort of centered at biology education to more broadly STEM education. So part of that was made available through the Hewlett funding that we have recently gotten. And in order to do the work that we really want to continue doing, we're continuing to partner with the Hewlett Foundation and to scale up a lot of our activities. And so we're in the process of planning for and launching a new institute called the Rios Institute. So I hope, you know, y'all will be a part of that as we move forward. And of course, I've been lucky to have many conversations via EDSA in collaboration with ADSA so far. So it's been really great to see folks excited at EDSA about thinking about equity and inclusion in the work that they're doing, and so natural partner. So I just wanted to sort of throw some big ideas out there that I said in a few different ways, but you know, just reiterate again. So one of the things that I'd like to sort of throw out there is, as we invest in open education for STEM, open science, open data, open for whom becomes an increasingly urgent question. Why should we invest in education or data or anything else that's free, but which reinforces oppressive pedagogy and science culture? And this isn't only about educational practices, but open for whom was a question that was brought to me first by a colleague, an Indigenous colleague that works in bioinformatics, who was pointing out that some of the NIH data sets, while they were open, were not shared with permission of some of the tribal communities that were represented by that data. And so again, open for whom is a question that I would like to invite us all to ask ourselves. How do we transform STEM education to be more collaborative, participatory, accessible, and address this mandate that we should be doing this thing? I think what we're seeing in data science is a lot like, you know, from my perspective as a math biologist by PhD, I guess that's the best way to describe that, is that, you know, math biology, when it came into its own as a field, you know, sort of got a chance to invent its own culture, right? Like, how is it going to be? How's it going to conduct? And we saw a lot more collaborative work. We saw a lot more work by mathematicians that was actually like relevant to the context in which the study was happening and things like that. I think that data science is also in the process of setting its own cultural norms for how it will work as a discipline. You know, I think collaborative is something that comes to mind, which I'm really excited about. I like what I've seen so far in terms of some of the accessibility and open data and open science mandates that they're trying to infuse in the culture. I think we need to ask very specifically and strongly about the racial and social justice, how that's going to play out as part of the mandate, because of what we've seen in a number of sort of ways through works by Joy Buolamwini or Ruha Benjamin or Kathy O'Neill, whoever is talking about the ways in which big data and big data models are affecting disproportionately in negative ways lives of already marginalized people and widening the disparity gaps that we'd like to close. So the last question is, how can we leverage all of the networks, SCORE, ADSA, everyone together to work towards a bigger goal? And I invite that collaboration with anyone. So thank you.
Thank you both. So we have time for some questions if folks from the audience would like to ask, and we're a small enough group that I think we can just unmute and chat. So questions?
My name is Kaylin Hikor. I work at the Science Education Resource Center at Carleton College. I have a question about what you were, well, first of all, thank you both. I learn so much every time I listen to either of you speaking about your work. I'm interested in what you're thinking about as data science evolves as its own discipline, how, you know, with the new norms that you're talking about, what the opportunities are for data science to influence the sort of more established or older STEM disciplines. I'm thinking about, you know, what are you envisioning as the interface with biology or, you know, geo or chem or physics?
Yeah. So I think there's a little bit of a position of power data science has, because they're holding a significant amount of resource and interest from, you know, folks who want to invest, right? And so I think there is a chance to say, hey, if you want to play, you have to publish open. You have to, you know, even your educational curricula need to be open. Like, you need to put it on some sort of repository. I mean, seems like a small step, but it seems like something that could have big impact in terms of, you know, and if you have the practices that you'd like to see in those curricula and you make them open, and maybe you even take the next step, you help other people understand why you've made you're helping other schools adopt curriculum, but at the same time, you're talking about why you've made this commitment to justice and equity. I think that can be pretty powerful. There's also other things, and I'll give Sam a chance to respond, but a lot of my own research work lately has been using the tools of data science to explore the culture of my own discipline. And so if I can, I'll put a link in the chat as an example, but I think it's a nice use of sort of math to dismantle myths about math culture, or maybe not dismiss math, expose things about math culture as well.
Hi, Caitlin. So to me, as a biologist and a science educator, this issue of the interface is really, really important, right? So for workforce participation, for equity issues, for even recruitment of diverse populations into technical fields, data science, data skills are going to play a huge role. And so biology has massive numbers of majors, right? So we have this access to lots and lots of young people who are wrapping their heads around what science is and how science gets done. So I think the potential is huge, and I think it's actually a responsibility to move away from sort of the content-centric, here's what we've known historically, to the more active, here's how we figure new things out and solve problems. But that's not new, right? We had that through experimental design, we had that through statistics in general. It's just that it's getting sort of bigger and bigger as the access to data and tools, the barriers are lowered to that. Now, those are technical barriers, right? I can go into Neon and download a massive data set. Do I know what to do with it? That's a whole different question. And so I think that there's a role for biology educators, STEM educators broadly, to begin integrating some of these ideas and practices early and often, so that the 10%, 5% of the students who go on and take a real data science course or pursue a minor are positioned to do that, but that everybody else is ready to act in a collaborative fashion on an interdisciplinary team, right? They're going to be bringing disciplinary knowledge to a data scientist who's working with them to solve a problem. And I just think those are huge needs. So potential is large, the challenge is large as well.
Other questions or follow-up to that question?
What Sam just said reminded me of this focus on content versus context. I feel like there's a lot of tension there that gets placed. Like, oh, if you spend the time on context, like you're not getting to the content, right? And so I think this is particularly playing out in very interesting ways, particularly in courses that are of the data science variety. And I like to push back on the fact that context makes your analysis rich. It has the opportunity to really make your data visualizations rich. If you understand the context, your insights can be richer. And I think trying to squish the content into less courses is going to maybe prove to be part of the problem moving forward. I just shared in the chat another link. This is just from my own particular context, which I'm at Bates College, and we have this new interdisciplinary digital and computational studies program, and a core of that is some of our data science courses that are integrative and very applied. And my colleague, that's a digital humanist, Dr. Annalisa Hansen-Schrout, in her course that's arguably sort of like a data handling course, the data that they're working with is the archives of of Bates itself in terms of his records. He was a cotton mill owner, and it's about calculating the financial dependency of the money that formed Bates and its dependence by cotton then means because of slavery. And so I think that these are really, not that all of your problems have to be so explicitly posited, but I think the richness of the experiences of these students, it would not have been captured had it just been just a data handling course.
That's a great example. Other questions?
Alan, I would throw it back to you. You've worked with a lot of earth scientists and environmental scientists, and that's a data intensive field. Do you find that faculty are ready to adopt more robust strategies? I mean, do you talk about reproducible research? Do you talk about scripting? Do you, all those fancy things like metadata? Where do you have projects that are dealing with those things?
We do. I think the people we're working with are the same people you're working with. I mean, in fundamentally, they're not the exact same people, but they have the same backgrounds, and they're not a monolith. I think there are examples all across the board. We are working with a group interested in teaching quantitative reasoning using large data sets. And what large data sets means, it can vary, but your example of downloading a bunch of neon data and then trying to figure out what to do with it is exactly what they're working with. And we there are changes in how people are approaching student or learner open-ended learning, for example, or exploration before learning instead of cookbook labs. Like, a lot of people are open to that. These other things that Carrie was talking about in terms of expanding the community and making sure that we're supporting learners from all different backgrounds and abilities isn't something that I see culture-wide yet in most of the groups we're working with. And I've also learned a lot. So I have a biology ecology background, and we do a lot of statistical analysis as part of the training, but geoscience has other quantitative methods that they use. And so this idea of sort of embarrassment about what we know how to do and don't know how to do with data is something that's prevalent and that we need to deal with. I mean, if you're a geoscientist, you haven't necessarily taken 62 statistics classes or any the same kind of computation that you do from a biology background or a chemistry background. It's a different set of analyses. And so we're trying to navigate that space, but I don't think that data science as a discipline has really entered the conversation the way that you're talking about yet. And maybe that's a place we need to talk about collaboration.
Well, I mean, some of it's because it's sexy, right? I mean, you can catch people's attention when you say data science, and we're very careful because what we're trying to avoid is the conversation that's ongoing about defining what are the core elements of a data science curriculum. I don't have anything to add to that conversation. We want to think about what are the steps that will set people up to have data acumen and have an orientation to using data resources to solve problems. So we intentionally sidestep some of the baggage around data science and the competition around whose domain it is, at the same time trying to elevate it within the discipline as a lever for increasing quantitative skill capacity. So I hope I didn't give anything away there. I like data science. I just don't want to claim I do it.
For a little while, we were working with a group called Lake Hall, which maybe Carrie has interfaced with, but they were in a place where they haven't figured out where data science lives in a liberal arts context yet, and really need to sort that before they can move forward with too much more programming, because somebody has to put up the classes, somebody has to, pay for the FTE for those things to exist. So I think they're sorting that before we'll engage again.
Yeah, I mean, our solution here was basically to create a whole new program just for that. So I've seen that for sure. I also think, like, when I think about how does data science fit into SCORE, because SCORE is STEM broadly, beyond the fact that it's sort of interdisciplinary cross STEM in a lot of ways. I think like this emerging areas as a time where new curriculum is being written and new discussions are being had. I think it's like the perfect time to like start like asking people about equity and inclusion too. So like not, I think it's really hard. Some of the issues in the math community is it's like really, really hard to transform like a calculus course. It's so ingrained in people's minds about the way it should be. It's just nearly impossible to transform it in the ways it might need to be transformed. But when you're inventing a discipline on its own, that's the time to start these conversations. So I think it's really an attractive incubating ground.
Can I ask, I mean, so you just made an assertion, Carrie, and I think it's interesting. So what makes that kind of change impossible, right? For like a intro calculus or chemistry.
Yeah. So, and I say this because I used to teach calculus, right? And I think I did a significant amount of transformation of that course, somewhat incremental, you know, somewhat broad, but doing that on a broad scale outside of the particular incubation context in which I was in, there's always these questions about transferability and, oh, are students going to be prepared for the next course? And there's so many sort of straw man arguments or theoretical arguments, you know, like somebody's going to be mad that we do this. I think that like right now, data science is so fuzzy that nobody's going to get really mad if your data science course isn't perfect. Like that somebody else is going to get mad that you didn't talk about X in your intro data science course. I mean, if it's in the computer science 100 course, that they might get iffy about that. And I think that's a real limitation on you know, some of our departments and structures and the culture of the discipline. Some of the humanities disciplines don't have these gateway courses the way that we do in STEM. And so, so I just, you know, I also think that my imagination was limited to the calculus box. And when I was able to get outside that calculus box, I was like able to think like, okay, like what kinds of quantitative skills do I want my students to have so that like we have, if they're going to take one course, like I send them into the world prepared. And it turned out I actually decided that our intro-ish data science course was going to be built off the Calling Bullshit curriculum by Jevin and West, because in my mind I was like, I want an informed public that's going to be able to read you know, information that they see in all of their memes and social media and make judgments about how true those things are, because they're going to have these skills about reading graphs and understanding where this data comes from and all sorts of other things that, like, that's what I think they need to be prepared for the data economy.
That's great, thank you. So it looks like we're running up against time. So I'd like to take a second to thank Sam and Carrie for presenting today, and remind you that this video will be up on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit this conversation or send it along to somebody else, and we'll get the word out to the community to let you know where that video is. But thanks again for coming, and to our speakers.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.